Hello again, my name is Steve Hillis, and we're continuing our discussions of major sociological theories. This is the last in our series of videos on functionalism. Here we're going to focus on some of the key concerns and core concepts of functionalism. Up to this point, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the organism metaphor. We've talked about the kind of the historical background a little bit of functionalism. We've talked about functionalist logic and so forth. But our discussion of functionalism really would not be complete if we didn't kind of talk a little bit more about how functionalism, what functionalism focused on, and that's what we're going to look at now, as well as some of the concepts that functionalists helped develop that became core concepts in sociology. One of the key focuses of functionalism was an emphasis on social order. Emil Durkheim was fascinated by social order, and frankly, he was concerned that chaos, anarchy was kind of always lurking under the surface in society, that societies could and sometimes did fall apart. So that kind of led him to focus much more on what kept societies orderly, what kept them stable, cohesive. Now, according to Durkheim, a lot of that had to do with things like social values, shared norms, and so forth. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. For right now, I just want to focus on the fact that many functionalists, not just Durkheim, really placed a huge focus on how societies maintain social order and social stability. Also, social cohesion. What is it that tied a society together, kept it unified as opposed to fragmenting, breaking apart? Now, this also led a lot of functionalists to be deeply concerned about social change. Some sociologists claim that functionalists really didn't have a theory of social change. We're not going to go into that right now, but I will point out that you can argue that functionalists really did talk a little bit about how and why societies change over time. In fact, Emil Durkheim wrote quite a bit about that. But Durkheim and other functionalists clearly were concerned about rapid, large-scale social change being very disruptive, basically breaking apart a lot of those shared values, shared social norms, creating, well, a lot of chaos and anarchy, which in turn would create a lot of social problems, a lot of disorder, and eventually could create severe problems for the larger society. Again, functionalists tended to be concerned about social order, stability, and so forth, and that led them to be somewhat leery of rapid, large-scale social change. And of course, they were also very concerned about the idea of any kind of radical social change, which really means a lot of functionalists were opposed to any kind of revolutionary ideology. For example, most functionalists did not support Marxist approaches to changing society by kind of reinventing everything, starting from scratch, having violent revolutions and so forth. Functionalists really thought that would be incredibly destructive and might very well actually destroy civilizations at their roots. Also, functionalists, particularly later functionalists, placed greater emphasis on social institutions. Remember all that stuff about functional logic and the organism metaphor, that societies, were organized in such a way so that they worked, so that the way that societies were organized was not accidental. Things existed the way they work, the way they look, for a reason. And that society is organized like a great organism. Each of the parts or systems are usually focused on certain kinds of functions, specialization. Well, when we begin to think and talk that way about how society is organized, then naturally we begin to talk about social institutions, social organizations that are specialized to perform certain kinds of functions. Government, the police force, families, educational institutions, healthcare institutions, and so forth. Many functionalists, beginning with Durkheim, but certainly later functionalists in the United States, placed great emphasis on the study of social institutions, on the study of large organizations. And that led them to develop further other ideas like organizational roles and more generally studying social roles. For them, well, they began to kind of change the orientation of functionalism. In fact, many people would call this form of functionalism structural functionalism. Functionalism that was really kind of emphasizing how society was structured, how it was organized. And if you think about it in that way, social roles became incredibly interesting. You could begin to think of society as a complex system of social roles. Each of these social roles tied to major organizations and institutions. Each person doing their job, playing their part to make one system or one organization or one institution work better. And then that institution or organization working to make the entire society work better. All of these various social roles, mother, father, baker, candlestick maker, president, police officer, all being parts that had to be played to make the whole system work correctly. Also, many functionalists placed a premium on the study of social norms and social values. That started out right at the beginning with Emile Durkheim. Remember, Emile Durkheim believed that society requires a lot of coordination to make it work correctly. What is it that allows society to function properly? What is it that allows complex social activities to be coordinated in such a way that the whole system works? Well, according to Durkheim, a lot of that had to do with social rules. Social rules about how to behave and not behave. What sociologists came to call social norms. The idea is that human social behavior is governed by rules. And those rules, in turn, are backed up by rewards and punishments, social pressures, and so forth. What's critical for Durkheim and other functionalists is that large numbers of people understand what these social norms are and that they follow these social norms, at least most people, most of the time. Now, Durkheim and others knew that some people would break social norms. It was inevitable. But to make society work properly, to get things done, to maintain social order and so forth, required lots of people basically following more or less the same rules most of the time. And that also meant most people sharing common values, working towards common purposes, believing in similar things, having similar attitudes towards what is important, what is good, what is right, what is just. Shared values were also critical to maintaining social cohesion, social stability, social order, and more generally, making sure that society functions properly. Now, Durkheim also placed a premium on social rituals. Now, that's not written up here, but it's closely tied to this idea of shared norms and shared values. Durkheim was a big believer that the social world is kind of, well, held together by all sorts of symbols and rituals that almost all of us engage in. And those things help us, or those things help promote shared norms and values. You go to church, you get down with other people and pray, perhaps on your knees, you sing hymns, you read from the Bible, you engage in all sorts of rituals. Well, in essence, what that's doing is fueling your emotional batteries. It's bringing you together with other people in a shared context. And as a result, you're more likely to share values with them. You're more likely to obey and believe in the same basic rules, the same basic norms. In fact, religion, in large part, can be viewed as critical to learning shared social norms. More generally, rituals, values, and norms held society together, coordinated social activity, and allowed people to live peacefully together and get things done. And finally, socialization. This is something, once again, that was probably a little more popular among later sociologists after Durkheim. Socialization, according to these later functionalists, was also critical to shared values and social norms, and frankly to social roles as well. How are we supposed to learn these social roles, or come to believe in these social norms and to follow them? How are we supposed to learn these common social values? Well, we're socialized to do it. Socialization is a very broad, general social process where we come to learn social behaviors, where we come to learn social values, customs, and so forth. Obviously, parents socialize their children. They pass beliefs, values, attitudes, behavior patterns from one generation to the next. Now, socialization is not just something that happens when a mother or father or parents kind of shape their children. We're all socializing each other all the time. The point is that socialization involves social learning, the transmission and the reproduction of social values, norms, and so forth. So, if those things are so important to making society work right, understanding how society coordinates itself and gets things done, well, that's incredibly important to know how and why people learn those norms and values. It's important to study socialization. By the way, that also points out why sometimes things go wrong, because if children aren't being properly socialized, or other aspects of social behavior aren't being properly socialized, I don't know, workers aren't being properly trained, or college students aren't being properly educated for jobs in the real world, if those kinds of things go on, it would produce problems in the greater society. Overall, functionalism really began to channel the focus and concerns of sociologists towards certain topics. Things like social order and stability, social organizations, institutions. And they really help develop core concepts that are used by sociologists today, even if they're not at all inclined to believe in functionalism. In other words, functionalists help develop some of the core concepts in our discipline. Things like social norms, social values, organizations, roles, socialization. Those are ideas that are still widely used. Even though functionalism is no longer a really popular sociological approach in today's world, many of the concepts and ideas that they help develop are still very much part of the conceptual arsenal that are commonly used by a wide variety of other sociologists. So, frankly, that probably gives us the best reason to look at functionalism beyond just looking at it as a historical school of thought. It's something that continues, at least indirectly, to contribute to sociology even today. Now, that finishes up our discussion of functionalism in this lecture series. The next lecture series, we're going to begin to talk about an alternative approach, a very different approach, something called conflict theories, or the conflict perspectives. And as you watch those videos on conflict theories, I'd strongly encourage you to at least pause from time to time and kind of think back how conflict theory is so different than functionalism. If you do that, you're not only going to understand conflict theories better, frankly, you'll also have a better sense of what functionalism is. And one of the things I'm trying to get across as I wind down on this video is that it's not only important to know what each of these particular theories or perspectives is and what they emphasize, it's also important that you be able to tell the difference between them. Again, we'll talk about conflict theory next time around, and well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.